Hello creatives, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be in Illustrator on the iPad once again. I have a illustration open right here. We're going to see the difference between 2D flat illustration and 2D complex illustration, or 2D illustration made to look 3D. So I have this illustration right here. You can see that this is very 3D in the fact that this has lots of light and shadow within the piece. So if we were just looking at a flat illustration, which means just base colors, then your illustration would look more like this. If you wanted it to be more 3D, you would turn the accents back on, or you would create accents of light and shadow. So that is what is meant by flat versus complex. So for accents, for instance, like these, instead of it being a gradient color, it would just be a flat color. So you can also create a 3D effect utilizing gradients versus flat solid color. That being said, let's go into this that I have created here so that way you can see the difference. Now we have a typographical piece. I have duplicated it onto a new layer here and I named them. So I'm going to show you the difference between a flat illustration and a flat illustration that is going to become 3D or complex, if you will. Zoom in right on here. We have very basic colors, RGB. If we wanted to make this into more of a complex illustration with shadow and light to make it not flat, all you have to do is select it. These are all grouped together. So I'm going to select it, duplicate this letter, take the stroke off of it because we don't need that. There we go. And then instead of going and putting accents, I'm going to select my point selection tool over here. I'm going to pull these points in. And you may remember doing something similar to this, especially if you are in university when doing shape-to-shape blends, where you would take an object and you would duplicate it on top and then you would go ahead and pull points like this. So this is very, very similar in the process, but different in what we are going to end up with. Shape-to-shape blends is something that you can do to create more of a 3D illustration from a 2D flat illustration, and that will help with the effect that you're going for, especially if you're doing like portraits and such. But since we're on the iPad and the iPad doesn't have shape-to-shape blends yet, we're going to utilize it this way. Now, I did choose the primary colors of RGB from the base swatches that are on the iPad. But what I'm going to do next is I'm going to choose a darker color, like so. And now you can see the difference here. There are some things that I need to fix, so I'm going to go in and fix those, again with the point selection tool still selected. Doing this, you can already start to see that it's becoming more of a 3D illustration than a 2D illustration. This is with working within the context of typography. You can take these skills and apply them to pretty much anything you want. We want to keep within the same construct of the piece. Spatially and visually, it's giving the R more depth as a piece, so you can see that difference there and there. So you can see it's starting to take shape. For the highlighting of the piece, I like to pick my light source from one side. And since it's like live-in RGB, bring the light in from this way. And then that way it has one light source instead of getting all confused and like bringing your light sources in from other places. You want one light source. So I'm going to bring my light source in from over here. And then that way we can put our light accents onto the piece and really make it more of a complex 2D illustration rather than a flat 2D illustration. Zoom in right here. I did put the shadow in with the shape so that when you select the shape it selects the whole thing. For the highlights, I'm just going to create a new sub-layer here. That way we have that to work on, that way we can turn it on and off. I'm going to choose a lighter color. And the way to choose colors, I do have a video based on all of this, so I'll probably have it like linked somewhere. But to choose certain colors for this, I just went all the way over here and chose my color. So very, very simple. I will typically either use the pen tool to do this, or I will just typically use the brush tool, because in the iPad version of Illustrator, the brush tool automatically defaults to points. So once you make a stroke, I'll show you here. There we go. It turns it into points. Now that one is way too big, so let's put down our size of our brush. Let's do a size of 2, and then just do a highlight like that. You might think that that is very dull, and it is very dull. So let's go back in and modify our color a bit. More lighter. There we go. Reform it, shape it however we choose. With the point selection tool, we can line this up a bit better. Now I would like to make this a little bit thicker, just for personal preference. Again, it is up to you and your style. There we go. So now it's taking shape a bit more and becoming a little bit more 3D. And so you have an accent there, and we can even do like a little accent right here. Let's go back to our highlight layer. Oh, by the way, always keep in mind, you always want to double tap and name your layers. So I'm going to put this as highlight. Press OK. It shows up highlight. There we go. Under the complex one. So I'm going to add more highlight. Make it work for you. So you're kind of getting the idea. Now we can do this to all the other letters here, to the G and the B. Now we have shadows throughout all of them. You will have to play with this a bit just to get it exactly right to what it needs to be as far as following the curvature and the lines of the text. So just fine-tuning it is key. Making sure you're utilizing your white direct selection tool or your point selection tool if you're here on the iPad. Really making sure it all stays pretty balanced. You don't want any harsh lines if there aren't any, and you don't want any massive gaps. So it all has to look pretty well weighted. Oh, by the way, what do you guys think of the rotate canvas? I find it quite nice. It's plain. Although sometimes I find it a bit distracting, but overall I find it quite helpful. Let's add a new sub-layer. I'm just going to put highlight 2, and then we're going to do like highlight 3. Now if you haven't seen my previous video of how I go through all of what's new in Illustrator on the iPad, I do have that as well, where I explain how you can name layers and like organize your layers and such like that to make it easier for yourself in here. So I'm on highlight 2, which is going to be the green. Now I did choose a highlight green. It's very, very light pastel. As you can see, I went from the green tone here, and I just went across to get a nice bright highlight color. We chose our light source coming from up here, and we're going to put those accents over here. So here and here, mostly. So let's go and do that. They're going to be small accents. They're not going to be huge. So let's choose our brush tool over here. Don't need that extra point. Always eliminate excess points, only because we don't want a complex illustration with a whole bunch of points if they're not necessary. You can get away with as few points as possible just to make it easier on yourself and when you're manipulating points, because the more points you have, the harder it is to make a fluid shape. And we want to keep this fluid because 1, it's typography, and 2, it looks so much better with fewer points. And that's just a rule of thumb. So there we go. Here's one accent, and then I'm going to do one right here. I get exaggerated. I knew it. I was like, it's gonna turn into a corner, isn't it? Yes, it is. That's all right. So let's choose the point that makes it a corner point, and you can select this and it'll make it a rounded point. So much easier, right? So let's just decrease that intensity. Let's get rid of some points we don't need. Whoops, I didn't select it, I missed. There we go. We have so many excess points here. There we go. Pull this into place where you need it. And you're probably wondering, like, how do you know where you need it? Honestly, you're just following the lines. See how these are both big curved lines? I'm just following that. So I can widen this out, give it more of a curve edge here, curve edge, give it more of a curve there. There we go. So we have 2 accents there and the rest is shadow. Now arguably I could do like another little accent here. So I wonder sometimes if the text is very well balanced, you can select a piece, duplicate it, move it over and use it in another area. So let's see if this will work. It looks like it might work. So let's just hold down our constraint. Okay, so the curve is not as steep over here as it is in that other area, which is completely fine. We can literally go in, choose our white direct selection tool or point selection tool, choose multiple points, manipulate them, move them, so that way we don't have to start from scratch. So you have more accents happening here and here. Let's go into creating more depth. So with flat illustration, like over here, there is no depth because it's just on one plane and that is it. For a more complex illustration, even though it's in 2D space, you want it to look 3D, you will need to create some form of depth. So let's go into our RGB group here. We don't want to select the highlights, so we will go ahead and lock those layers. So I just want this group. I'm going to duplicate it and set it back here. So now that we have done that, select each one of these. Let's lock that top layer there, our top group. We are on our shadow here. And just to make it easier for you guys to see, I'm going to hide that top layer. So now we're just working with this one. Let me also hide the highlights. So now we're working with our base again. I'm going to make this the dark red color that I had chosen for the accents. And then this one, same thing. So now it has much more depth, as you can see here. Now all we need to do is make it look like it's connected, starting over here. Let it reach. You're just going to manipulate the points to make it look like this is actually coming off from here and is more connected. Remember, our light source is coming from this way. We want all of our shadows to be over this way. It's all about manipulating the points and getting your visual depth correct. The more you manipulate it, the better it'll look. Another technique is to utilize the gradient option. Now, the gradient option is going to be used for the word live. Shall we use gold? I feel like we should probably use gold. Go into gradient. It's right here in your color selector here. Gradient. We're going to utilize linear gradient. That's what it's called. And instead of having it go from that way to that way, you can just move the points like this. I'm going to add another one. And then the middle color, if you select it, you can change it. There we go. And I'm going to keep the rest of this black just so you can see. And then we can do the same thing to the other letters here as pull and pull each endpoint. The tap does a new point for you. So not only do you have tension and movement by this moving this way, you also have it through light, shadow, color, so you have more of your elements and principles of art in the piece. And the more that light shines from a smaller source into like a bigger source, the more dispersion of light you get. It starts off small and then it disperses out quite big. So that's what I'm doing here. Of course, you could always take this and make it have more depth as well, because the more depth you have, the more it will come alive, so to speak, come alive. Instead of this being black, I can make it more of a different color. So let's modify the gradient here, and instead of it going into black, it will go into a gold. So we can go from there, take it down deeper. What's that code? 8C7A01. Okay, 8C7A01. And type in the code 8C7A01. And you can have it look more like that. So it looks more colorful and gives you a bit more depth. You can duplicate this and move it back, change the stacking order to send it all the way to the back. And instead of it being a gradient, we can make it a solid color, and it'll default to the 8C7A01 because that was the last color that was selected. And then you can give it a bit more depth like this. Now remember, our light source is coming from the top left, and then to connect these two together, point selection tool here, I'm going to add another point just to make it easier on myself. And so you get more of a 3D version in comparison to this. See that? So those are just a few techniques that you can utilize. That way you can have a more vibrant, more lively, more 3D effect to your 2D illustration. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Go ahead and give it a like if you did. Go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you want to see more things like this, let me know down below and I will do them. I will see you all in my next video. See you soon, creatives.